Okay, so we need to unpack this whole thing with Nipsey Hussle. Listeners want a deep dive, and they deserve to know what really happened. It goes way beyond the headlines, you know? We're talking firsthand accounts, we're going through court testimonies, the whole 9 yards to understand that day in 2019.
Yeah, it's important to remember Nipsey Hussle was more than just a name in the music industry. He meant something to his community, represented hope. To really get the impact of this, we have to look at the man, not just the music.
You're right, you're right. And the sources we have really try to show his life before the fame, after the fame. He was really involved in his community, huh?
Totally. Poured his time and money right back into those streets. But it was more than charity. This was about giving people a way up. He started businesses, gave people jobs, mentorship, showing them there's another way.
And that's what makes his past with the Rolling 60s so interesting, doesn't it? Adds another layer.
It does. He never hid from it. But he was clearly set on a different path. For himself, for everyone around him, talking about being a symbol of change. And he meant it.
Which makes, well, it makes the stuff with Eric Holder or Flymac even more jarring. He was trying to be a rapper too, right? And ran with the Rolling 60s. What was their deal?
They were connected, for sure. Same circles.
Hmm.
But at some point, something went wrong. It's not really clear what, but I think it shows you how complicated gang culture is, how it sticks with you even when you're trying to get away.
It's like, thanks. Like he spent his life trying to lift everyone up and the violence, and then...
Then he's a victor of it. Just shows how deep these things go, you know?
Yeah.
Like you can't escape it, even when you're building something better.
It's almost like you can see it coming, you know? Like these two paths are on a collision course that day in 2019.
Yeah, you could say that. It's like a tragedy, almost.
Yeah.
You've got Nipsey at his store, that Marathon Clothing, which was more than just a store, right?
Right, not just some clothing rack. It was a hub, the heart of something. That day, he was with his fans, taking pictures, living the dream, basically.
And on the other side, you've got Eric Holder driving to that same mall with his girlfriend, who had no clue about any of this. She sees Nipsey when they get there, all excited.
It's those little details. They really get to you. Just random chance makes the whole thing hurt even more, you know?
Totally. Like something heavy is hanging over everything, but nobody sees it except them.
So what happens when they actually meet? Walk us through it.
Okay, so the sources we have, they really lay it out, every detail. Holder comes up to Nipsey, they shake hands. There's some talk about paperwork, whatever that means. But what gets me is how calm Nipsey is.
Yeah.
The whole time.
Yeah, the sources make a big deal about that. He never loses it. Right?
Never. Even when Holder's getting at him, he's just cool. Like he's trying to give the guy advice, you know?
Yeah.
Point him in a better direction.
And then, well, then the shooting starts. I know what happens, but it's tough to process.
Yeah, it's brutal. Holder's just unloads on him. Multiple shots. And what really gets me is he comes back and shoots him again after walking away once. And Nipsey's last words, the source says, he said, "You got me."
Ugh. Just awful. And it's not just that he did it, it's that he meant to do it. This wasn't just some random thing. This was personal.
No doubt. This was anger, resentment, way more than just a fight in the moment.
Yeah.
The number of shots. Even the fact that he kicked Nipsey after. It's different. Darker.
It's like a bad dream, you know? 1 minute, this guy's larger than life, and the next, gone.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there. We've got the aftermath, the investigation, the trial.
And this is where it gets interesting. Because it's 2019, right? Cameras everywhere. Technology plays a big role in figuring out what happened.
Right, like all that footage from the mall, the security cameras, that was important, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They used it to track Holder's every move. Before the shooting, after the shooting. No room for doubt.
No alibi. He couldn't say it wasn't him.
Nope. And on top of that, you've got the witnesses, even his girlfriend, the one who drove him there.
Yeah.
Adds a whole other level to it, hearing her side.
Caught in the middle, even if she didn't know it was going to happen.
Exactly. Shows how these things, violence, touches everyone, you know.
So the trial, what happened?
With all the evidence they had, it was open and shut. Guilty of first-degree murder, 60 years to life.
Wow. Justice, but it doesn't bring Nipsey back.
It doesn't. And what's worse, the trial, it showed how badly this hurt Holder's family, too. His younger brother. He couldn't take it. Took his own life after the shooting.
Oh, man. Proof that it's not just one life, you know? The effects, they ripple out.
That's what's so important about looking deeper, right? Getting past the headlines, seeing the real cost.
It really makes you think. Nipsey Hussle, he was more than just a musician. He was a symbol of hope, of making things better. And while we can't change what happened, maybe we can all learn something from it. His drive, his dedication to his community, that's something that should live on, you know? So as we close this deep dive, think about this. What will you do to make a difference where you are? Think about it.
All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving deep into a court case that'll leave you thinking, wait, what?
Oh, it's a good one. Gets right to the heart of some major constitutional questions.
It all starts with a simple bus ride in Chicago. Ends up in the courts, tangled up in the Fourth Amendment, the Second Amendment, concealed carry laws, the whole shebang.
Yeah, it really makes you think about those everyday situations, you know? The ones that can suddenly turn into like a legal battle over your rights.
Okay, so picture this. You're on the bus, just mind your own business, and boom, police stop the bus, come on board, and arrest a passenger for, get this, having a gun. Sounds crazy, right? Like something out of a movie.
It does, but this actually happened.
It did. It's the case of United States v. Dameron. And as we unravel this case, you'll see there are more twists and turns than you might expect.
Definitely more than a bus route.
So let's rewind to July 5th, 2018. Our main character, Emmanuel Dameron, is walking in a neighborhood that, according to police records, is known for its high crime rate. And now, here's where things get interesting. A Chicago police officer is watching live feeds from those poll cameras.
Oh yeah, the ones you see everywhere these days.
Exactly. And the officer spots Dameron, sees what looks like a gun tucked into his waistband.
So right away, we're thinking about surveillance, privacy in public, all that.
A whole other deep dive right there.
I bet.
But for now, let's stick with Dameron. The officer calls in a tactical team. Dameron then hops on a city bus, and things escalate quickly.
I bet.
The tactical team stops the bus, boards it, goes straight to Dameron, frisks him. And yep, just as that officer thought, they find a gun in his waistband. Dameron's arrested, charged with possessing a firearm as a felon.
Okay, but now I gotta ask, did they even have the right to do that? I mean, seeing a bulge under a shirt, is that enough to stop and frisk someone? Seems like a pretty big leap.
You're hitting on a crucial point right there. That's where the Fourth Amendment comes into play, the one that protects against unreasonable searches and seizures.
The Fourth Amendment, everyone's heard of it, but what does it actually mean in practice?
Right, so break it down for us. What's the deal with the Fourth Amendment?
Well, the gist is police can't just search you or your stuff without a good reason. They need what's called probable cause, which is like a really high standard. But there's this exception, a big one, called reasonable suspicion, and it comes from a famous case, Terry v. Ohio. That case established that police can do a quick investigatory stop, a stop and frisk, if they have reasonable suspicion that someone's up to no good and that they're armed and dangerous.
So it's not enough to just see a potential weapon. There needs to be more to justify stopping someone. But reasonable suspicion, that feels kind of subjective, doesn't it?
Totally. Courts have been trying to define that for ages. Basically, it means the cops need to be able to point to specific facts, circumstances that would make any reasonable person think, okay, something's off here and this person might be armed. It can't just be a hunch. They need solid evidence.
Gotcha. So in Dameron's case, seeing that bulge under his shirt in a high-crime area, was that enough to justify stopping the whole bus and frisking him?
Well, that's exactly what Dameron's lawyers argued. They filed what's called a motion to suppress. Basically, they're asking the court to throw out the gun as evidence because they're saying the cops didn't have enough evidence to stop and frisk him in the first place.
So, like, you got that evidence unfairly, can't use it.
You got it. It's a key part of protecting those Fourth Amendment rights, making sure evidence is obtained legally.
Makes sense. So the defense says not enough evidence, but what was the prosecution's argument?
They argued that put it all together, the visible bulge, the high crime area, that created enough reasonable suspicion for the officers to act.
So did the court agree? Did they think those circumstances met the bar for reasonable suspicion?
They did. The district court denied Dameron's motion to suppress. They said context matters. It's not just about the potential weapon, it's the whole picture. And in this case, they ruled that combo, the bulge, and the location, that was enough for reasonable suspicion.
Interesting. So, seems pretty open and shut, right? But here's where things take a turn. And you're probably thinking about it already. Concealed carry laws. Illinois has them. Couldn't Dameron have been a legal gun owner? Doesn't that change everything?
You're thinking like a lawyer now. And you're right. Illinois does have concealed carry. So could the police just assume Dameron was breaking the law by having that gun?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And yeah, Dameron's lawyers, they brought up the Second Amendment during the appeals process. But there's a twist, a little legal snag that really throws a wrench in those arguments.
A twist, huh? Lay it on me. So remember, this whole thing went down on a city bus. And that little detail, that's actually huge. Because the Illinois Concealed Carry Act, the very law that says people can carry concealed guns, well, it has a specific exception. It's all about public transportation.
So, like, there are places you can carry, places you can't.
You got it. The law, it straight up says no firearms on any public transportation, buses, trains, subways, anything funded by public dollars. So even if Dameron had a permit, all legit and everything, the minute he stepped on that bus, he was breaking the law.
Wow. So even if he'd done everything right to legally carry, he still couldn't have it on the bus. Feels like a bit of a catch-22.
It does, right? It shows you how complicated these concealed carry laws can get. The right to bear arms, bumping up against all these other regulations. And this is where the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, they're the ones who looked at Dameron's appeal. This is where they really zeroed in. They kind of skipped over that big Second Amendment debate and focused on this specific violation of Illinois law.
So they said, because he had a gun on the bus, permit or no permit, he was breaking the law. And that gave the police that reasonable suspicion to stop and frisk him.
Exactly. That's what makes this case so fascinating. It's less about the Second Amendment in general, more about how the Fourth Amendment works alongside these very specific state laws. The court's saying, basically, even if he could legally carry that gun somewhere else, being on the bus with it created reasonable suspicion of criminal activity.
It's like a legal puzzle, figuring out where you can and can't carry based on these super specific laws. Interesting, but kind of confusing too. So what happened to Dameron in the end?
They upheld his conviction. The Seventh Circuit agreed with the lower court, said the police were within their Fourth Amendment rights. They stressed that because he was carrying on that bus, directly violating Illinois law, that was enough for reasonable suspicion.
So it's not just can you carry a gun, but where you can carry it. And a little detail like being on a bus can have big consequences. But I still keep thinking about the big picture. The Second Amendment, it guarantees the right to bear arms, right? Where does that fit into all of this?
You're right to bring that up. The Second Amendment, it's fundamental to American law. And yeah, it's totally relevant here. The thing is, the Seventh Circuit, they focused narrowly on that concealed carry violation and what it meant for the Fourth Amendment. But by doing that, they kind of sidestepped a direct clash between those two big amendments.
Feels like we're tiptoeing around a huge constitutional issue.
We are. And this case, even though it was decided on these very specific grounds, it touches on some much bigger, much more debated issues about the Second Amendment. Especially now, with those recent Supreme Court decisions, Heller and Bruen, those really expanded gun rights.
For those of us who aren't legal experts, what are those cases all about? Why do they matter here?
Okay, so Heller, that was a big one back in 2008. The Supreme Court, they said for the first time that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to have a gun at home for self-defense. That was a major shift in how we understand the Second Amendment. It opened the door for more legal challenges.
So Heller said individuals can own guns, not just militias, right?
Exactly. Then in 2022, the Supreme Court went even further with the Bruen case. They struck down a New York law that restricted concealed carry permits. Basically, they said the right to bear arms goes beyond your home. And it set a higher bar for states to justify any limits on those permits.
So Heller, Bruen, they've really broadened the Second Amendment. How do they connect back to Dameron?
That's the question, isn't it? They make us wonder if laws like that Illinois provision, the one banning guns on public transport, can they hold up under this new understanding of the Second Amendment? The Seventh Circuit, they didn't answer that directly, but it's there, lurking in the background of the case. It's this tension that's building, and it could reshape the whole legal landscape around gun rights and law enforcement.
Sounds like we're on the verge of a major legal showdown.
Maybe we are.
So Dameron's case, it might have been decided on those narrow grounds, concealed carry and the Fourth Amendment. But there are clearly much bigger issues at play here. Issues we'll be debating and fighting over in court for years to come, and that's what we're going to dig into when we come back for the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore what United States v. Dameron means for the big picture, what it means for the future of gun laws, law enforcement, and that tricky balance between public safety and individual rights. All right, we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into this Dameron case. It's been a wild ride, from that bus stop in Chicago all the way to the courts, grappling with the Fourth Amendment, concealed carry, and the whole Second Amendment debate lurking in the background.
It really shows you how complicated things can get, huh? Individual rights, law enforcement, the Constitution, it's all intertwined.
Totally. And even though the court kind of sidestepped a head-on collision between those big amendments, the Fourth and the Second, it feels like we've only just started to uncover this huge debate that's going on. Dameron's case, it might be about one guy on a bus, but it raises some really big questions about where we draw the line. Public safety versus personal freedom.
Oh, yeah. It's a classic dilemma. And for everyone listening, I think the takeaway here is this case isn't just about legal mumbo-jumbo. It's about your rights, how they're balanced against worries about security and crime. The Dameron case, it makes us ask those tough questions, like how much power should we give law enforcement to stop and search people? What exactly is reasonable suspicion? And how do we make sure there's no bias, no profiling going on?
And on the other side of the coin, how do we protect those individual rights, especially the Second Amendment, while still trying to keep our communities safe?
It's like walking a tightrope. It is. And this whole balancing act is only going to get trickier as the laws around the Second Amendment keep changing. Those Supreme Court decisions, Heller, Bruin, they've really broadened gun rights, and that's going to impact cases like Dameron from now on.
Feels like we're at a turning point. We've got these expanding gun rights, and at the same time, more and more concerns about gun violence. How do we make sense of it all? How do we create laws that respect individual rights and keep people safe?
Tough questions. There's no easy answers. But what Dameron shows us is that these aren't just abstract debates happening in courtrooms. They have real consequences for real people. The outcome of this case, it could change how police interact with anyone carrying a gun, legally or not. It could spark more challenges to gun control measures, and it could reshape how courts interpret the Second Amendment across the board.
So whether you're out walking, riding the bus, or just catching up on the news, remember United States v. Dameron. It reminds us that the law is constantly evolving. Our understanding of rights, especially gun rights, it's still shifting.
Absolutely. Stay informed, keep those conversations going, think critically about what's happening around you. The balance between liberty and security, it's an ongoing conversation, and we all have a role to play.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everybody. We'll see you next time with another fascinating topic, ready to explore the world around us, one case, one issue at a time.
Okay, so you've probably seen the headlines, right? Like, teenager killed in subway. It's one of those things, it's a gut punch, but then the news cycle moves on, right?
Yeah.
But this YouTube video, The Final Hours of Nadia Osama, this one really kind of pulls you in and makes you think about, well, everything, really. Gang life and the dreams that get cut short. And it all went down on a New York City subway platform.
And what I think is so interesting about this video is that it doesn't just give you, like, the facts of the case. It really gives you a look into what it's like to be a teenager right now with hopes and dreams and how that collides with gang life.
Totally. And we're talking about Ethan Reyes. He went by the name Nadia Osama,
Right.
14 years old, an aspiring rapper. And he was on the cusp of making it big.
Yeah.
I mean, he was connected, he was talented. They even show in the video he's meeting with record labels like Sony.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes you think about how quickly things can change. For Naughty, everything changed on July 9th, 2022. A regular Saturday with his brother, just hanging out that day, changes everything.
And the video takes us to 137th Street and Broadway. Nadia and his friends, they run into this other teenager, Kelvin Martinez. And the video kind of hints at this history, right?
Yeah, it seems like bad blood, yeah.
Bad blood, yeah. Fueled by gang stuff, probably.
Yeah.
And things escalate, like they do, unfortunately, and they end up in the subway station.
Right, in that confined space, it just adds to this feeling of tension.
Yeah. And the video does not hold back. It tells you right away. A broomstick and a knife.
It's scary to think about how quickly things can become so dangerous.
And they did, sadly. The video goes on to describe this chaotic scene. It's on the platform, and Nadi's stabbed in the abdomen.
Awful.
Rushed to the hospital, but he doesn't make it. And what the video captures so well, is the aftermath. His brother, Didi, he's there, and you feel his pain.
It's just raw grief, because it's not just losing a brother, it's losing someone he made music with. They had dreams together.
And you can hear it in the songs. He releases tribute songs, Letter to Naughty and E4N. And it makes you think about the ripple effects, how it's not just one life lost, it's everyone who's left behind.
It's devastating. And the video just goes right into, the investigation and the NYPD trying to find the person responsible for Nadi's death, we don't always get to see this part of the story.
Right. And you feel that urgency, like they have to find out who did this. And they include this footage, it's kind of wild, from the press conference.
Yeah, the one with all the reporters.
Yeah. And we meet this guy, NYPD Transit Chief Jason Wilcox. And he talks about how they used the cameras, the MTA cameras, in the station.
To retrace everyone's steps, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. And you see it happen. They get a description of Kelvin Martinez. They find him, and that's it.
And the video even mentions that he had some injuries, too.
Oh, yeah, from the fight. They had to treat him at the hospital first before taking him in.
It really shows you just how quickly things can escalate and how it's not always, clear cut.
Totally. And then they hit him with these charges. Murder and having this weapon. So you're watching and you're like, okay, well, this is it, right?
Right, you think it's open and shut.
But that's where things take a turn. Because those charges, well, they didn't really stick, did they?
No, they didn't. And the video goes into how the whole legal process went down. Because at first, they downgraded it to manslaughter.
Okay, wait. Can you explain that? Murder, manslaughter, what's the difference? I think a lot of people hear those words, but they don't actually know what it means.
It's a big difference, yeah. So murder means you planned it out, you went in with the intent to kill someone. Manslaughter, though, it means like you did it in a heated moment. Maybe you didn't mean for it to go that far,
So they're saying Martinez didn't mean to kill Nadi?
It seems like that was what the prosecution was suggesting, yeah. The video talks about how they didn't think they could prove that he intended to kill him, which is a big deal when it comes to a murder trial.
So even with all of it, the chase, the knife, they couldn't get a murder conviction.
No, it's more nuanced than that, right? Remember all that footage, all those witnesses they talked about? Well, it sounds like, based on the video, that some of that evidence suggested maybe Martinez was acting in self-defense.
Self-defense. So are they saying Nadi was the one who started it?
It's really hard to say for sure. The video doesn't say one way or the other. But the point is, the prosecution, they felt like they couldn't prove that it wasn't self-defense.
It's almost like the video becomes this bigger commentary, right, on the justice system. Because, I mean, a young life was lost. It's tragic. But then again, the law is the law.
It's that gray area.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, was justice really served? Did they make the right call? These are questions you keep asking yourself even after the video's over.
For sure. And just when you think it can't get any crazier, they start talking about what happened after Nadi died. About this whole Nadi Bop thing. That just gives me chills. I mean, how do people even process something like that, Like, here's this awful tragedy, and then it becomes a dance trend.
It's kind of like we've become numb to this stuff, especially with social media. It's all about going viral, even if it means, like, just respecting someone's memory.
The video does a good job of showing this whole dark side of being online. They even show how people were doing this naughty bop, even, like, teachers got caught up in it. It makes you wonder, where does it stop?
It's a symptom of a much bigger issue, though, right? And the video touches on this. It's the glorification of violence. Especially in that world, in gang culture, it's like this vicious cycle. Violence just leads to more violence, even if it's through something like, you wouldn't think it, but like a dance trend.
Right, right. And it'd be really easy to just get stuck there, in all that negativity. But then we see Didi.
Yeah.
He turns all that grief, all that anger into his music.
He finds a way, yeah.
And the video shows how he doesn't just stop there. Like, he's meeting with all these big record labels. Sony, again, it shows you, even when it seems like all hope is lost, something good can still happen.
Exactly. And I think that's what we really have to take away from this deep dive, from this whole video. It's easy to focus on the headlines and the court cases, but behind all of it, it's people's lives. We have to look closer, listen with empathy.
For sure. And for me, the big question, the one I can't shake, what if? What if Nadi and Martinez, what if they had made different choices? It's a lot to think about. But Nadi's story, it's important, It shouldn't just be another headline. It should make us think, make us talk about this stuff, about the cost of violence and how we can do better.
All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on Omar Porti, and this is going to be a fascinating one. This guy goes from being like an eyewitness in a murder case to leading one of like the most notorious gangs in America. I mean, how does that even happen, right? We've got court records and articles, so let's see if we can figure this whole thing out.
It's interesting how Porti's story really kind of flips the script on typical gang narratives. We're talking about someone who was like already deeply involved with the justice system before he ever became a big player in the criminal world.
Yeah, okay, so let's go back to like 1989. Porti's 17 years old, already mixed up in robbery. Not exactly like this straight and narrow, you know. But then he becomes a key witness in this Terrence Joyner murder case. His testimony puts Don Taylor away for over 10 years. Can you even imagine being that young and having that kind of power, like in your hands?
It's a massive responsibility, and one that, unfortunately, isn't always handled perfectly. Years later, Portee actually recants his testimony, and Taylor ends up being released. This case alone could be like its own deep dive. It really shows the problems with eyewitness accounts and how devastating wrongful convictions are. Think about the years stolen from Taylor, the trauma on both men. It's a real stark reminder that the justice system, while it's supposed to be fair, it's definitely not perfect.
Absolutely. And it really makes you wonder if
Why?
this experience somehow influenced Portee's future.
Yeah.
Like, did seeing the system from both sides as a witness and then later as a defendant in his own cases shape his outlook?
It's a good question to think about. What we know is that in 1993, while Portee was doing time on Rikers Island for a weapons charge, he meets Leonard Mackenzie, and together they co-found the United Blood Nation, or the UBN.
Hold on, wait. So the UBN, this like nationwide gang, started in prison. That's kind of crazy.
It is, yeah. And actually, it's a pattern we see a lot with gangs. They start as a way to just survive, the brutality of prison life, offering some kind of protection and belonging in a super chaotic and dangerous place. But what's really unique about the UBN is how it went from just this prison gang to this huge force on the streets, spreading from Los Angeles all the way to New York.
So Portee's basically building a criminal empire from behind bars.
Yeah, kinda. There's this famous story about how he leads this attack on some rival Latin kings using a shiv that he made from a Scrabble tile. It shows his leadership even back then.
Yeah.
Resourceful, ruthless, and he could clearly get people to be loyal to him.
Okay, that Scrabble shiv detail, that's wild. But it also paints a pretty grim picture of prison life. It's not just surviving in there, it's about being in charge. You said the UBN went national. How did that happen?
Well, when Portee gets out in 1999, he's got a plan. He sees the potential for the Bloods to become like a major player in the criminal world. And he goes about setting things up with like almost military precision. He creates these different sets, like the 1-8 tray, sex, money, murder, and gangsta killer blow.
Oh, hold up, sets. Can you break that down a bit? It sounds like he's running a business, not a gang.
You're not wrong. These sets are like divisions within a bigger organization. They each have their own territory, their own thing they focus on. It's a way to control different criminal enterprises like drugs, prostitution, robbery, while keeping like a chain of command. Portee knew that organization meant power, and he used that ruthlessly.
So he gets out of prison and goes right back to a life of crime. What was his motivation? Was it just power and money? Or was there something else going on there?
That's where things get really interesting, and where we start to see how complicated Portee really is.
Yeah. It's kind of like he saw this opening in the criminal world and just knew how to take advantage of it. But how do you go from like a Scrabble shiv in prison to running this whole network across the country? Were there people helping him? Connections he made on the outside?
We don't really know for sure, but it's obvious that Portee had this mix of street smarts, charisma, and ruthlessness that let him handle both prison and the streets. He understood how loyalty and fear worked, and he used both really well to build his empire.
It was working for a while, right?
Yeah.
He built the Bloods into this powerful force.
Yeah.
But empires don't last forever. What brought Portee down?
Well, like a lot of guys before him, Portee's own success was his downfall. The bigger the operation, the more attention it gets from the law. And law enforcement was definitely watching. They were putting together a case, getting evidence of his whole criminal enterprise. You remember those sets we talked about? Each one was like a clue leading back to Portee.
That sounds like they were coming after him hard. What were the charges they got him on?
They hit him with everything. They had racketeering, murder, conspiracy, credit card fraud, drug trafficking. The list just goes on and on. Racketeering is kind of interesting here. It's what they usually use against organized crime because it focuses on the whole pattern of criminal activity, the whole enterprise, not just single crimes.
So even if he wasn't directly involved in every crime, they could still link him to the bigger operation. That's crazy. What happened at the trial?
The evidence was just too much. In 2002, Portee was convicted on 10 counts, and then the next year, Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald sentenced him to 50 years in prison. That's basically a life sentence. He ends up at ADX Florence, the Supermax prison in Colorado. That's where they keep the most dangerous criminals in the whole federal system.
ADX Florence.
Yeah.
That's the Alcatraz of the Rockies, right?
Yeah.
That's where guys like El Chapo and the Unabomber are. That's a whole other
Oh, it was it?
Exactly. It's made for inmates who are considered a serious threat, even inside prison. Inmates spend like 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. They can barely move around. The mental toll of that kind of isolation is huge. It's a total opposite from the life Porty had built on the streets, leading this massive organization.
It's almost like something out of Shakespeare, the rise and fall, the power, and then being completely alone. It makes you think about the choices he made, the path he chose. Was it all worth it in the end?
That's a question only Porty can answer. But his story makes you think about power, the appeal of being a criminal, and the price of ambition. It's a warning for sure, but it's also a look into a world that most people will never see.
It's hard to believe this all started with a kid who saw a murder. But that's what's so cool about these deep dives, right?
Yeah.
You never know where they'll take you. It's just crazy to think that seeing that murder, way back when, could set this whole thing in motion, turning Porty into this major gang leader.
Yeah.
Do you think seeing the justice system up close so young seemed like the problems with it, maybe that affected his choices later on?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible seeing the justice system like that at such a young age, especially under those circumstances, can really change how you see the world. It could made him feel like the system was against him, that it was rigged. Maybe that made him want to operate outside the law.
Right, so instead of trying to work within the system, he decided to go against it. But we can't forget, he was convicted of serious stuff. This wasn't just some guy fighting an unfair system. He hurt people.
Oh, absolutely. We can't forget about the victims of Porty's crimes, the families that suffered from the violence and the drug trafficking he was running. His story reminds us that even when we're trying to understand the criminal world, we can't forget about the people who were hurt.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, right? Trying to understand what makes someone like Porty do what he did without saying it's okay. But that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. They make us look at these hard truths, these situations that aren't so black and white.
You got it. And actually, Porty's story doesn't end with him going to prison. He was moved from ADX Florence to a prison that's not as strict. It's part of a step-down program. It brings up all these questions about rehabilitation and redemption and second chances.
Hey, so he might actually get out someday. That's a lot to think about. What do you think about that? Is it a good sign? Maybe even someone like Porty can change.
It's really hard to say. The prison system is supposed to punish and rehabilitate, but it doesn't always work. We don't know what'll happen if Porty gets out. Will he go back to his old ways, or will he use what he's learned to try and make things right? Only time will tell.
I guess that's life, right?
Okay,
And Porty's life even more so.
Huh.
It's been wild going from that eyewitness testimony to prison gangs to supermax prisons, and now he might even have a second chance. What a journey.
Yeah, it really has. And even though it's focused on one guy, it makes you think about bigger things like justice and redemption and how humans can be both good and bad. It makes us question our own ideas about these tough issues and think about all the gray areas. It's not always so simple.
So we're wrapping up this deep dive on Omar Porty, and I've got more questions than answers now. It's amazing how complex and interesting people can be. What about you, listener? What really stuck with you about Porty's story? What questions are you thinking about now? Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into another fascinating life?
Always.
This time, we're taking a closer look at Polly Adler.
Now she's a name that raises eyebrows.
To say the least, a notorious madam running a, thriving business, let's call it, in New York City, the 1920s through the 40s. We're basing this deep dive on a Wikipedia article about her. And trust me, it gets pretty interesting.
Oh, more than interesting, I'd say. Her story really digs into a whole era, a whole social structure.
Absolutely, because we're not just talking about the scandalous side of things. We're looking at how she built a whole empire, especially at a time when women, let alone immigrant women, face so many roadblocks.
It's a story of ambition, definitely survival, set against, all the huge social changes happening in America back then. Think about it, the early 20th century, you've got industrialization booming, immigrants pouring in.
A whole new world forming, really.
Exactly. And you can picture Polly arriving from Belarus, just 13 years old, limited resources, barely speaking the language.
It's hard to even imagine facing those challenges. And then, on top of that, the source mentions this traumatic experience she had early on. Working at a corset factory, she was assaulted, ended up pregnant.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. And think about it. Back then, the support system, the understanding around these things, practically non-existent. Single motherhood, abortion, huge stigma.
So limited options for someone in her position.
Exactly. And while, of course, we can't condone every choice she made, you really have to see her actions through the lens of those limited options.
It's like judging a chess game from the 1920s by today's rules. Right? The board's the same, but the moves you're allowed to make, totally different.
Perfect analogy.
So we got Polly navigating this whole turbulent world. She lands in Manhattan. The energy, the opportunity, but also, well, the vice. And that's where she meets Nicholas Montana. This guy's, well, he's involved in connecting women with wealthy clients. Let's put it that way.
And that encounter, that's a turning point, really sets her on a certain path. But it's important to note, she didn't just fall into this and give up. The source mentions her trying other things, like running a lingerie shop.
Right. So it makes her eventual choice even more striking. She decides to really dive into this world, not just survive, but conquer it. And that's where her business sense, you see it shine. Luxurious houses she sets up. The majestic tower decked out in, well, opulent isn't even the word. There's a bar designed like King Tut's tomb.
Talk about knowing your target audience.
Yeah.
This was a calculated move miles away from that stereotypical image of a dingy brothel.
Right. Creating an experience, a brand almost.
Exactly. And reportedly, the women working for her, well-treated, highly sought after, she catered to New York's elite.
Almost like she was using modern marketing before anyone even came up with the term, building relationships with journalists, making sure people were talking about her places in all the right circles, and of course, managing things with the authorities to keep the whole operation running.
A whole web of, well, social maneuvering and economic savvy.
Definitely. And speaking of maneuvering, this is where it gets really juicy.
Yeah.
The client list. We're talking names like Peter Arno, the famous cartoonist, George S. Kosman, the playwright, even Dorothy Parker, the writer, the wit.
And those are just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. You've got Jimmy Walker, the mayor himself. Makes you think, what did it say about those times that she could attract such a powerful, diverse group? Were they looking for a discreet escape from public life? Or maybe indulging in some forbidden fun during Prohibition?
Ah, Prohibition. Can't forget about that. A whole underground economy popping up around illegal alcohol, speakeasies, and, well, other businesses, too.
So did Polly capitalize on that atmosphere? Was her success tied to those underground economies merging?
It's a fascinating idea. She was right at the crossroads of, well, wealth, desire, and that thrill of breaking the rules. It's crucial to see her within that whole context. It's not just about sex work. It's about understanding the social forces, the legal loopholes, how things were changing in America.
And, as her business takes off, she can't fly under the radar forever. That's where the scandals, the legal trouble come in. A whole new chapter of her life.
Polly's story, it really makes you think about American history at the time.
Yeah.
All those contradictions,
Yeah, the Roaring '20s, all that excitement, the culture changing so fast, but also this pushback against anything seen as, well, immoral. People were anxious about all the changes, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that tension, you can see it play out in Polly's life. She wasn't exactly invisible to those judging eyes, especially when you get to the Seabury Commission investigations in the early 30s. They were all about exposing corruption in New York's government.
Big scandal stuff.
Exactly. And while Polly wasn't the main target, you can't separate her business from those powerful figures. She got caught up in the whole mess.
Makes you realize how risky her position was, not just running the business, but navigating those legal and political waters. And they weren't so clear-cut back then, were they?
Not at all. And think about the hypocrisy, right? Like in the spring of 35, she gets convicted, but not for prostitution, for having objectionable films.
Sounds like a bit of a convenient excuse to target her, don't you think? I mean, she was operating in this gray area, legally and socially.
Totally. It really shows you how the law, even when it seemed clear, could be used against certain people, the undesirables or those without the resources to fight back.
And that wasn't the end of her legal troubles either. 1943, she even ends up in prison, her 17th charge related to prostitution. But then the case gets dismissed. Was that her lawyers being clever, or did those powerful connections come in handy?
Tough to say for sure without digging deeper into, well, court records, accounts from the time. But it's not hard to believe her influence helped her navigate the system better than, say, someone with less clout. Justice wasn't always blind, especially in New York. Too many layers of power.
It paints this picture of Polly as, well, a real operator, handling the business side, the legal pressures. But was there more to her than just that? One quote that stood out to me, it's from Milton Berle, the entertainer. He knew Polly and described her as intelligent woman, fun to be with, and a good cook. Hints at a different side, right?
It's a peek behind the curtain, isn't it? The woman beyond the madam image. How did she manage those different parts of her life? Did she have real friendships outside of that world? How do you reconcile those two sides of yourself?
So many questions. And a good place to start exploring them is her autobiography, A House is Not a Home. Published in '53, became a huge hit, Over 2 million copies sold, even a movie based on it.
Wow, that's quite the impact.
What do you think motivated her to write it? Was it a tell-all, spilling secrets about those high-profile clients,
Yeah.
or something more personal, trying to control how people saw her?
Think about the time period, too, the 50s, Cold War anxieties, conservative values making a comeback. Was she cashing in on the public's fascination with, well, vice? Or trying to make sense of her life in a world that was becoming less tolerant?
Whatever the reason, the book's success shows Polly knew how to hold people's attention. She understood storytelling. Maybe she saw this as a chance to show herself as more than just a madam. A woman who broke the rules, made her own way, even if it was controversial.
That's a really interesting take, and it raises another question, doesn't it? Was she a product of her times, shaped by those unique circumstances? Or was there something more, well, timeless about her drive, her ambition, in a world that tried to hold women back?
That's a great point. And then another big turn in her story. 1945, she decides to retire from her, well, let's call it entrepreneurial career.
And she doesn't just fade away either. This woman never finished high school, goes back, gets her diploma, then an associate degree from Los Angeles City College.
That's incredible. Talk about resilience. It challenges that whole idea that, well, someone in her line of work wouldn't have intellectual curiosity, you know?
Almost like she's rejecting the label society gave her, pushing herself, learning, showing she's more than just the madam.
But was it all about personal growth? Or maybe also a way to change her public image, gain some respectability in a society that had, well, often judged her harshly?
It could be both, couldn't it? We're all complicated, made up of different parts. Even those who live in the shadows can have hopes, dreams for something more.
Absolutely. And that's what makes exploring these stories so important. They remind us that people aren't just one thing, even those who make choices we might not agree with.
It's about understanding the nuances, the gray areas, and honestly, that's how we understand human nature better, right? The push and pull between what society expects and what we want for ourselves.
So, as we get towards the end of Polly's story, I'm struck by, well, just how much her life covered, from poverty, trauma, to building this controversial empire, and then seeking some kind of, I don't know, redemption through education, writing. It's like a mini history of America itself, all those changes happening around her. You know, looking back at Polly's story, it really makes you think about how things would be different today. I mean, she navigated this very specific world back then, but would someone like Polly Adler even be possible now?
That's a question, isn't it? The world's changed so much, even just thinking about the internet, social media, the whole legal and social landscape around sex work is completely different.
Right. Back then, part of her success was those limited options for women, that whole underground scene during Prohibition. Things have shifted so much.
Imagine how someone would gain that kind of notoriety in the 21st century. Would it even be the same path?
It makes you wonder. I mean, Paula was a master of publicity, but that was a different time. Imagine her with Twitter going viral.
Haha. Notorious madam becomes influencer.
Exactly. But jokes aside, it's fascinating how ambition, entrepreneurship, they take different forms in different eras. But that drive to stand out, to make an impact, even if it means breaking the rules, that seems pretty constant.
It's human nature, right? And that's what makes studying someone like Polly Adler so interesting. It's not just the juicy details. It's about understanding the bigger picture, how people navigate the world around them.
And I think that's a big takeaway for anyone listening. Agree with her choices or not, Polly's story shows us that history is full of these complicated people. You can't just put them in a box, label them good or bad.
It's a reminder to look deeper, understand the context. Every historical figure, every person really, has these nuances that make them unique.
So wrapping up our deep dive into Polly Adler's world, I'm left with this feeling of, well, respect for how she adapted, overcame challenges, and ultimately wrote her own story, literally and figuratively.
And for me, it's that reminder about the power of individual stories. They shed light on bigger historical trends and honestly make us question what we think we know about the past.
Absolutely. If anyone's intrigued by Polly Adler, definitely check out her autobiography, A House is Not a Home. It's her first-hand account and really gives you a look into that whole era of New York City.
A fascinating read, trust me. You'll learn a lot about Polly, the time she lived in, and maybe even yourself.
That's what we hope for with these deep dives, to spark some curiosity, encourage you to explore, to learn more.
Keep diving, keep asking questions, keep searching for those stories that make history so captivating.
Until next time, happy exploring.
All right, let's dive into one of hip-hop's biggest unsolved mysteries, the murder of Biggie Smalls.
The notorious B.I.G.
Yeah. We're going to be looking at this through the lens of someone you might not have heard of, Wardell Poochie Faust.
Yeah, Poochie's story is really fascinating, I think, for anyone who's interested in this case. We've got a great Wikipedia article on him that we'll be referencing.
And it's interesting because his life intersects with Biggie's in some really unexpected ways.
Absolutely.
Like I said, Poochie, he started out in Kentucky but ends up in Compton, California.
Right.
And that's where he gets involved with this gang called the Mob Pirates, a set of the Bloods.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the Mob Pirates is that their influence wasn't limited to just the streets. It extended into the music industry in a big way.
And that's the link to Suge Knight, right?
Exactly. Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, was also connected to the Mob Pirates.
So it's more than just like a boss-employee relationship?
Oh, well, absolutely. It's a shared history, a shared sense of loyalty that goes way back.
And you have to wonder how much that influenced the way things were run at Death Row.
Because Death Row had a very specific reputation. It was hardcore, almost like a gang in itself.
Yeah, and Suge Knight was definitely cultivating that image.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
He understood the power of fear and intimidation.
And Poochie fit right into that.
With his presence, yeah.
Our sources actually quote Danny Boy, a Death Row artist, describing Poochie as someone you just did not want to cross.
Right. He had that enforcer vibe about him.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, what does enforcer actually mean in this context?
Yeah, it's a loaded term.
Because we're not talking about bouncing rowdy fans. We're talking about a world where problems are solved with violence.
Like in the case of William Rat Dog Ratcliffe.
Oh, yeah. This is a really disturbing incident.
Ratcliffe was an aspiring rapper trying to get signed to Death Row, and he was really pushing Suge Knight about it.
He even confronted Knight in a bathroom.
And according to the LAPD detective Greg Kading, Ratcliffe ends up dead, allegedly on Knight's orders.
And Kading believes Poochie was the one who carried out the hit.
There's even this chilling quote from Kading's book where Knight supposedly said about Poochie, "He doesn't fuck around. That's how I want him to do it."
Wow. If that's true, it paints a very dark picture of Knight's mindset. He valued that ruthlessness.
And there's another detail that's kind of eerie. The car Knight gave Poochie a Chevy Impala.
Right.
The car involved in Biggie's murder was also described as a dark Impala.
It's a detail that's hard to forget. It's almost like foreshadowing. But before we jump ahead to the night of Biggie's murder, I think it's important to understand the climate of hip-hop at the time.
Yeah, we can't forget about the East Coast-West Coast rivalry.
It was at its peak. Biggie on one side, Tupac on the other. The tension was incredibly high.
And the media just kept fanning the flames, turning it into this huge feud.
Yeah, it's impossible to ignore the role that played in what ultimately happened to both of them.
So let's set the scene. March 9th, 1997. Biggie's leaving a party hosted by Vibe magazine in Los Angeles. It's this big industry event, tons of celebrities, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and as he's leaving, tragedy strikes. Biggie's in the second SUV of his entourage. They're stopped at a red light.
Okay.
And a dark Impala pulls up alongside them. Witnesses describe the driver as a black male.
And
shots rang out. Biggie's hit multiple times.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast. You have this glamorous event, and then just moments later, this brutal act of violence.
The hip-hop world was in shock.
The world in general. Biggie was a huge star, and suddenly he's gone.
And the search for answers begins.
Yeah.
And the LAPD is under huge pressure to find out who killed Biggie.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the biggest names in music.
And the lead detective, Russell Poole, he starts looking into Suge Knight and Death Row Records.
Right. Poole was convinced that Knight was somehow involved.
And his theory goes even further than that.
Yeah. He actually suspected that Knight might have used corrupt LAPD officers to help with the hit.
Whoa, hold on. Corrupt cops?
Specifically, David Mack and Amir Mohammed. It's a pretty explosive allegation, right?
Yeah.
And it gets even crazier because according to our sources, Poole was actually told to stop investigating Mack.
No way!
Yeah, which ultimately led to him quitting the force.
Wow. Talk about a cover-up.
It's a mess, right? So the case ends up going cold for a while, but then it's reopened in 2006 with the new detective, Greg Kading.
Okay, so what does Kading find?
Well, Kading's investigation goes in a totally different direction. He focuses on Poochie.
As the shooter?
Yeah. He concludes that Poochie was the one who killed Biggie, hired by Knight, through his then-girlfriend, Teresa Swan.
And was there any evidence to support that?
Well, Kading actually got a confession from Swan.
Really?
Uh-huh. And they even tried to use her to get a confession out of Knight while he was in prison.
Like a honey trap kind of thing?
Exactly. They wired her up, but Knight didn't fall for it.
Wow. So what happened to Poochie?
Well, that's the catch. By the time Kading starts digging into all of this, Poochie's already dead.
Dead.
Yeah, he was shot like 10 times while riding his motorcycle back in 2003 in Compton.
Damn. So is that why they never officially named him as a suspect?
Right, because he was already gone. But it also raises a whole bunch of new questions.
Like, was his death connected to Biggie's murder?
Possibly. Was it some kind of revenge? Or was it something else entirely?
Like a gang hit?
Yeah, Kading seemed to think it was related to a feud between different blood sets.
Which just shows you the kind of world Poochie was living in. Always surrounded by violence.
Definitely. But there are other theories out there, too.
Like what?
Well, there's a book, Once Upon a Time in Compton, and it claims that Poochie was actually killed on the orders of this rival gang member named Lil Rod.
Interesting.
And they even say he was killed with an AK-47.
So we've got these two completely different stories about Poochie's death. One connecting it to Biggie's murder, and the other saying it was just gang warfare.
It's hard to know what to believe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what about Suge Knight? Where did he fit into all of this?
Well, Knight was never officially charged in connection with Biggie's murder.
But a lot of people still believe he was behind it.
Both Poole and Kading seem to think he was the mastermind, even if Poochie was the trigger man.
But the evidence against him is all pretty circumstantial as well.
And there's the Impala he gave Poochie, which matches the description of the car at the shooting, and his reputation for being ruthless.
But is that enough to actually connect him to the crime?
That's the question, isn't it? It's tough to say for sure. But even if we assume for a moment that Poochie wasn't the shooter,
Okay.
does that automatically clear Knight?
I don't think so. I mean, he created an environment where violence was like the norm.
Exactly. He surrounded himself with guys like Poochie who were willing to use force.
And he instilled fear in everyone around him.
He built this culture of violence and intimidation at death row.
So even if he didn't directly order the hit on Biggie,
his actions and his leadership created a climate where something like that could happen.
and that's what's really fascinating about this whole case. It's not just a whodunit.
It's bigger than that, right?
He's talking about the music industry, the role of gangs, the power dynamic.
And how all of these things came together to create this perfect storm of tragedy.
You're right. This is so much more than just one murder.
It's a reflection of a specific time and place in American culture.
When hip-hop was exploding, but also struggling with its own demons.
It's a reminder that success and fame often come with a dark side.
And that darkness can have devastating consequences. This deep dive has been quite the journey, hasn't it? Exploring the life of Wardell Poochie Faust.
Yeah, a figure who's shrouded in so much mystery and tied to Biggie's murder.
But even after examining all these sources and theories, where do you think this leaves us?
I think it's important to remember, even if we never know for certain who pulled the trigger, Poochie's story offers a window into a really complex and dangerous world.
It's like we were peeling back layers of an onion, revealing all these intricate connections between the streets, the music business, and even law enforcement.
And each layer just adds to the complexity of this case.
But for you, what stands out as the most significant takeaway?
For me, it's that Poochie himself remains such an enigma. We have these glimpses of his character, his loyalty to Suge Knight, his ruthlessness, but we never truly get inside his head.
I mean, isn't that part of what makes true crime so captivating?
Yeah, that desire to understand what drives someone to commit such acts, to unravel the psychology behind it all.
Was Poochie a product of his environment? Or was there something more, a darker impulse?
It's impossible to answer definitively.
Right.
But by exploring these theories, we at least get closer to understanding the forces at play.
Poverty, systemic racism, gang culture.
Yeah, all those things can create a breeding ground for violence.
And the music industry, with its allure of fame and fortune, can sometimes exploit those vulnerabilities.
Absolutely.
And what about the LAPD's role in all of this? That whole thing with Detective Poole being told to stop investigating a potentially corrupt officer is pretty disturbing.
Definitely. It raises questions about whether they were truly committed to justice or if other agendas were at play.
It makes you wonder if the truth was intentionally obscured.
Poole's resignation really is a turning point.
And this case isn't just about one murder. It's about accountability and the erosion of public trust in law enforcement.
Yeah, it really is.
It's also a reminder that even though decades have passed, the impact of this case is still felt today.
Absolutely. Biggie's music continues to inspire, but his murder remains this painful reminder of the violence that can permeate even the most celebrated corners of our culture.
What's the key message you would want listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I think it's that we may never have all the answers, but by engaging with these stories, by grappling with the complexities and the injustices, we keep the conversation alive.
It's about honoring the victims and demanding better from the institutions that are supposed to protect us.
Exactly.
For anyone wanting to explore further, we highly recommend checking out the Wikipedia article on Pucci, as well as those books by Greg Kading and Tim Brennan and Robert Ladd.
There's so much more to uncover, so many threads to pull.
In a case like this where answers are so hard to come by, the journey itself becomes even more compelling.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into one of hip-hop's most enduring mysteries. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll catch you next time.
Ever heard of a reggae star who ended up being called the most dangerous man in Britain?
Wow.
Yeah, it's a wild story.
Yeah.
So today,
I'm intrigued already.
we are diving deep into the life of Ranking Dread, a man who's really shrouded in contradictions.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from his Wikipedia page
Okay.
to sort of guide us,
Okay.
but it's more like a puzzle with like missing pieces
Yeah.
than a straightforward story.
Yeah. What's striking is just that stark contrast. You've got vibrant reggae music on one side, and then you have these serious criminal allegations on the other.
Right.
So where do we even begin to unpack a life like that?
Exactly. It's almost like we're trying to solve a mystery here.
Yeah.
Was he a cunning manipulator,
Right.
hiding behind this musical persona? Or was there something more to the story? Let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Winston Brown, born in Jamaica, finds his voice on the Ray's symbolic sound system.
Okay.
Now, for those unfamiliar with reggae culture,
Mm.
sound systems were everything. They were like the breeding grounds for new talent,
Yeah.
the heart and soul of the scene.
Absolutely. And for Ranking Dread to rise within that world, that says something about his talent and charisma.
Right.
It's not easy to stand out in that environment.
Not at all.
It's very competitive.
So then he makes the move to London in the late 70s, right when reggae is exploding there.
Wow.
He even ends up working with Lloyd Coxone's sound system,
Oh,
a legendary name in reggae.
huge.
Imagine the energy and the excitement of that time.
I know. Can you imagine?
It seems like he was on this like perfect path to success.
Yeah, he was riding that wave. He's releasing albums like Girls Fiesta,
Yeah.
Lots of Loving, even titles that kind of hint at this like playful, even romantic side.
Yeah.
And then there's Kunta Kinte Roots, a nod to his Jamaican heritage, and a much more serious theme.
Right.
Do you think these two sides of Ranking Dread, the entertainer and the man grappling with identity, were ever truly separate?
Yeah.
Or were they always intertwined?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to complicate things further, he drops this catchy single, Fatty, Boom Boom, which
Wow.
becomes a minor hit in the UK.
Okay.
Have you ever heard it?
I can't say that I have.
It's got this really infectious energy,
Okay.
a real party vibe.
Interesting.
But this catchy tune masked a looming storm in Ranking Dread's life.
Wow. Oh.
By the mid-1980s, the music fades and the allegations start piling up.
Okay.
Suddenly, he's branded the most dangerous man in Britain,
Wow.
even Yardie Godfather.
Now, those labels, especially Yardie, those were loaded with prejudice and fear.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have this talented artist on one side and then this image of a criminal mastermind on the other.
Right.
Were those labels rooted in reality?
Yeah.
Or were they fueled by something more sinister?
It's crucial to remember the social and political climate of the time.
Yeah.
The UK was grappling with racial tensions,
Uh-huh.
economic anxieties, a rise in gang violence. Jamaican immigrants in particular were often scapegoated and stereotyped.
Right.
So it's possible that Ranking Dread, with his rising fame and undeniable charisma, became a target,
Right.
a symbol of those anxieties.
So we're already seeing how context shapes perception.
Right.
Ranking Dread's story isn't just about one man.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a clash of cultures,
Yeah,
a struggle for identity, and the power of labels to define a person's fate.
it's true.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like we're peeling back layers of a complex onion here.
Yeah,
And with each layer, the story gets more intriguing.
right.
So let's dig into those accusations a bit deeper.
Okay.
What were the specific charges against him?
Well, the details get a bit murky here.
Okay.
You know that he was deported from the UK in 1988 for illegal activities.
Okay.
Specifically, it involved an illegal drinking club and possession of drugs.
Okay.
But then there's this ominous label, the most dangerous foreign national living in Britain.
Right.
It's a pretty loaded statement, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it raises the question, was this label based on concrete evidence?
Yeah.
Or was it more about perception and fear-mongering.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
The media at the time often portrayed Ranking Dread as this powerful figure in the criminal underworld,
Right.
linked to Jamaican gangs and even violence.
Uh-huh.
But remember, these were allegations, not convictions.
Right.
It's vital to separate what was reported from what was proven in a court of law.
Right, and it makes you wonder if his association with figures like Claude Massop, a Jamaican gang leader, wanted for numerous murders,
Yeah.
if that fueled that perception.
Undoubtedly, that connection played a role.
Yeah.
Guilt by association is a powerful force,
Right.
especially when you're dealing with these complex criminal networks and
Right.
sensationalized media coverage.
Right.
But it's important to note that Ranking Dread always maintained his innocence.
He did.
Even in a 1990 Canadian TV interview,
Okay.
he claimed he was being unfairly targeted and that the authorities were building a case based on speculation and prejudice.
So we're left with these two conflicting narratives.
Yeah.
The official account painting him as this dangerous criminal,
Right.
and then his own insistence that he was a victim of circumstance.
Right.
It's a classic he said, she said situation,
It is.
but with much higher stakes.
Precisely. And it's precisely this ambiguity that makes this deep dive so compelling.
Right.
We're not dealing with clear-cut heroes and villains,
Yeah.
but rather with complex individuals navigating a system that might have been predisposed to view them with suspicion.
Right. It makes you think about the power dynamics at play, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Here you have this Jamaican immigrant already facing potential prejudice, and then these allegations surface, further marginalizing him within the larger society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's crucial to consider the historical context here. The
Yeah.
UK in the 70s and 80s was grappling with a lot of social unrest,
Yeah.
economic anxieties, and racial tensions.
Immigrant communities, especially those from former colonies, were often seen as outsiders,
Yeah.
easy targets for blame and suspicion.
So his story becomes intertwined with this larger narrative about immigration, identity, and the struggle for acceptance within a society that might not be fully ready to embrace difference.
That's a really insightful observation,
Yeah.
and it adds another layer of complexity to this already multifaceted story.
Right.
We're not just talking about one man's alleged criminal activities.
Yeah.
We're talking about the systemic forces that might have contributed to his downfall.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle
Yeah.
of missing pieces.
Yeah.
We have these glimpses into his life, the music, the accusations, the denials,
Right.
but we may never know the complete truth.
It's true.
What happens next in this international saga?
Well, after his deportation from the UK, Ranking Dread's life becomes this whirlwind of international intrigue.
Oh, wow.
He's deported from the U.S. in 1990.
And then just a year later, he's arrested in Canada for allegedly assaulting his girlfriend.
Wow.
Imagine the legal battles, the constant movement, the struggle to find a place to call home.
It's almost as if he was constantly running,
Yeah.
trying to outrun those labels that had been attached to him.
Yeah.
Did he ever find any sense of stability or peace?
Unfortunately, his attempts to evade those accusations only seemed to solidify the narrative that had been constructed around him.
Right.
In Canada, he even tried to claim refugee status,
Wow.
arguing that he feared for his life if he were sent back to Jamaica.
Wow. Claiming refugee status is a serious move
It is.
that suggests he truly believed his life was in danger.
Right.
What was the basis for that fear?
Well,
Was he worried about retaliation from former associates, or did he feel threatened by law enforcement?
that's where the details get a bit hazy.
Okay.
We don't have access to all the legal documents or personal testimonies from that time. But it's clear that Ranking Dread felt trapped, caught between these accusations and his own insistence that he was being unjustly targeted.
So he's fighting deportation,
Yeah.
claiming refugee status,
Right.
insisting on his innocence.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of a man desperate for a chance to clear his name.
Absolutely.
Did the Canadian authorities believe him?
Unfortunately, his attempts to escape those labels proved futile.
Okay.
His refugee claim was ultimately denied,
Okay.
and he was extradited back to Jamaica in 1994.
That must have been a crushing blow.
Yeah.
To be sent back to the very place he claimed to fear for his life.
It's a tragic turn of events.
It is.
And sadly, the story doesn't end there.
Oh, no.
Just 2 years later, in 1996, Ranking Dread died in prison in Jamaica.
What a heartbreaking end to such a turbulent life.
It is.
It's like this cycle of accusations and escapes ultimately led him back to where it all began.
Right.
But even in death, the questions linger.
They do.
Was he truly a dangerous criminal?
Yeah.
Or was he, as he claimed, a victim of circumstance?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that we might never be able to answer definitively.
Right.
We've examined the evidence,
Mhm.
we've explored the social context,
Yeah.
considered the complexities of his life,
Yeah.
but ultimately we're left with this cloud of ambiguity.
It's a reminder that sometimes the truth is elusive.
Mm,
We try to categorize people, to label them as good or bad.
right.
But real life is rarely so black and white.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from this deep dive into the life of Ranking Dread.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of hasty judgments, the power of perception, and the importance of seeking understanding even when faced with these conflicting narratives.
It's also a reminder that every story has multiple layers,
Right.
and every individual is more than the sum of their labels.
Absolutely.
We should approach each other with a bit more empathy,
Yeah.
recognizing that there's often more to the story than what meets the eye.
I couldn't agree more. Ranking Dread's story is a testament to the complexities of human nature, the enduring power of labels, and the need for nuanced conversations about crime, immigration, and identity.
Yeah.
It's a story that challenges us to think critically,
Right.
to question our assumptions,
Yeah.
and to approach complex issues with an open mind and a compassionate heart.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
If you had the chance to sit down with Ranking Dread,
Yeah.
what would you ask him?
Mm-hmm.
What would you want to know about the man behind the music and the controversy?
Good question.
Let us know your thoughts, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive into the unknown.
Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep today into the life of Raphael Edmond III. You might know him, the name anyway, synonymous with DC's crack epidemic in the 80s. Went from basically nothing to running a drug empire. An empire, by the way, worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But here's the thing. The question I think we're all asking. How did a guy like that end up working with the very system he spent years fighting against?
Yeah, it's a story about power. Yeah, and fear, but also loyalty. And it is one wild ride. Lots of twists and turns. Really unbelievable.
I bet. We dug up court documents, a whole bunch of news articles, even some firsthand accounts from people who, actually knew Edmund.
Oh, wow.
So this is gonna be good.
You're in for some serious aha moments with this one. Seriously.
All right, let's set the scene. DC in the 80s, crack epidemic right at its peak.
Yeah.
And we got Raphael Edmond, barely out of his teens, already at the top of this massive drug operation, moving this tons of cocaine into the city every week.
Every single week.
Yep.
We're talking between 1,000 and 2,000 kilos. Direct from the Medellin cartel.
Oh, hold on. The Medellin cartel, like the Medellin cartel.
The one and only.
Yeah.
The ones who, basically, they were the ones controlling the global cocaine trade at that point.
Wow.
And his organization, making estimated $300 million a year.
300 million.
A year.
Okay, but big money like that, there's a dark side.
Always a dark side, yeah.
And Edmund's organization, linked to some of the worst violence DC had ever seen. I mean, they were connected to 30 murders in 1 year.
30.
This was when DC got, the horrible title of murder capital of the U.S.
Yeah, and it's not just about selling drugs, right?
It is
It's about
like
violence, controlling the city, maintaining his grip on power, total control. I mean, the crack epidemic was tearing apart communities
Yeah.
everywhere, and DC was right in the thick of it.
Yeah. And Edmund, meanwhile, living the high life. There's a story about him spending almost $500,000 in one clothing store in Georgetown.
Million.
On clothes.
That wasn't just clothes, though. It was, sending a message,
Yeah.
projecting an image, power, wealth, intimidate rivals, attract followers.
Like a king.
Exactly.
It's insane that a kid like that, could build this crazy, complicated criminal empire.
Yeah. It does say something about, the whole environment around the crack epidemic, fast money, so many young people got pulled in. But you got to admit, Edmund, he had charisma, and he knew how to get people to be loyal to him or scared of him.
Or both.
Probably both.
Yeah. Speaking of fear, you know that story about him and John Thompson.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Yeah.
The legendary coach of the Georgetown Hoyas.
Yeah. Huge Georgetown fan. Loved sitting courtside with, his whole crew.
Oh, yeah. Always with an entourage.
And he was seen with some of the players, too.
And that's what got Coach Thompson's attention.
Oh.
Thompson was not going to let anyone, and I mean anyone, especially some big-time drug lord, mess with his players' futures.
So Thompson, he was not a man to mess with, that's for sure.
Yeah.
He uh he called Edmund into his office. Can you imagine that meeting?
Legendary coach, known for, being a bit intimidating, to say the least,
Yeah.
and the most feared guy in the city. Intense, doesn't even begin to cover it.
So some say Thompson just straight up told Edmund to back off,
That's right.
stay away from his players, warned him, about the consequences. Others say it was more, respectful, an appeal to Edmund's sense of responsibility.
Huh. It's interesting how this one meeting, so much debate about what really happened in that room.
Yeah.
Did Thompson actually scare him? Or was there some kind of understanding between these two powerful guys?
Right. Whatever happened, though, it's clear Thompson's, stepping in. It stopped Edmund from being directly involved with the players. And it's pretty amazing that Edmund, with his, reputation, didn't do anything to get back at Thompson.
That really says something about John Thompson, the respect he commanded, or maybe the fear. Either way, even Rayful Edmund wouldn't cross him.
But Edmund's time at the top couldn't last forever. In '89, he's just 24 years old. His world comes crashing down.
Arrested.
Ah.
And it was everywhere. The news, massive story. And the trial, oh man, it was like something straight out of Hollywood. The authorities, they were so scared of him, of his crew, they went to crazy lengths to protect everyone involved.
What do you mean crazy lengths? Like what?
Witness protection.
Yeah?
On steroids.
Well.
Jurors were anonymous, totally secret identities. They were even behind bulletproof glass in the courtroom. Nobody from the public allowed in. And get this, every day. Edmund flown in from Quantico.
Quantico.
The maximum security prison, by helicopter.
A helicopter? Are you serious?
Yeah, it's serious. The justice system itself was terrified of this guy. Think about it. This is a guy who built his entire empire on fear. They weren't taking any chances.
So what happened? What was the verdict?
Guilty. No surprise there. Long list of charges, drug trafficking, racketeering, even using minors in his operation.
Yeah.
The sentence, life without parole. Seemed like the end of the road for Rayful Edmund.
You'd think so, right? Case closed. But man, life is stranger than fiction. Even behind bars, Edmund couldn't resist the pull of the drug trade.
You're not kidding. He actually kept running his operation from inside Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary.
Wait, how? How's that even possible?
Prison phones. To connect with suppliers in Colombia, coordinate deals on the outside. The guy was basically the CEO of a criminal enterprise while sitting in a federal prison.
That's unbelievable. I bet the authorities were not thrilled.
Furious. Huge scandal. Congressional hearings, investigations. How was security so lax? Edmund ended up getting another 30 years, tacked onto his life sentence. But then, the biggest twist of all, the one nobody saw coming.
This is where the informant part comes in, right? The part that I still can't wrap my head around.
Yep, 1996. The news hits. Rayful Edmund, the guy who built an empire by defying the system. He became a government informant, spilling the beans, helping the feds take down other big players in D.C.'s drug world.
That's crazy. What made him do it? I mean, was it real? Like, did he actually want to make things right? Or was it just trying to save his own skin?
Well, officially, he agreed to cooperate to get his mother a reduced sentence. She was in prison, too, for her part in his operation. But some people, they think it was fear. Maybe for his own safety inside.
He definitely had some powerful enemies.
No doubt. By becoming an informant, he basically signed his own death warrant. In the eyes of his old crew, anyway. So to protect him, witness protection program. Nobody knew where he was.
He just disappeared.
Vanished.
So did he ever come back?
He did. Fast forward to 2019. Edmund's in his 50s now. And he's back in a D.C. courtroom, this time, asking for a reduced sentence because of his, cooperation.
Wow. What was the reaction? I mean, people must have been shocked.
It was mixed, yeah. Some people, they thought he did his time, deserved a second chance. Others, outraged. They said, this guy's dangerous. He should be locked up forever. Actually, a survey at the time found that half of D.C. residents, they actually supported releasing him.
Half?
Yeah. Shows how complicated his legacy is. He caused so much pain. But he also risked his own life, helping to bring down these other criminal organizations. No easy answers there.
So did he get out? Did they reduce his sentence?
The judge did, yeah, in 2021. Reduced it. But remember that extra 30 years for running things from prison?
Oh, right.
That one stuck. So it looked like he'd be spending a few more years locked up.
But not maximum security, right? He ended up in a halfway house.
Right. In 2024, July. Transferred to a halfway house, location undisclosed. Seemed like he was finally, nearing the end of this crazy journey. Then Another twist.
Come on, this story never ends. What happened?
December 2024, just a few months after getting to the halfway house, Rayful Edmond died.
He died.
Heart attack, age 60, sudden, unexpected, end to a life that was, well, anything but ordinary.
Wow. That is a story. From kingpin to informant to a quiet death in a halfway house. It really makes you think about choices, and
Yeah.
consequences.
Yeah, full of contradictions his life was. Ruthless criminal who caused a lot of pain. But there were times he was generous, even willing to cooperate. It shows you people are complicated, even the most notorious ones.
For sure. But we can't forget, the bigger picture. His
Yeah.
story is so tied up with the crack epidemic. Such a dark time in this country. Destroyed so many lives, so many communities.
Absolutely. Got to remember the victims,
Mm.
families torn apart, neighborhoods scarred by the violence. Edmund's story might be captivating, but it's a reminder of the real cost of the drug trade, the
Yeah.
devastating consequences.
Okay, so let's recap. Rayful Edmond III, D.C. drug lord, built a multi-million-dollar empire, terrorized the city, even had that face-off with Coach Thompson, then arrested, high-security trial, life sentence, but even in prison, he keeps running his operation, gets him an even longer sentence, then bam, he becomes a government informant, risks his life to take down other drug dealers, years in witness protection, and then he comes back. Asks for a reduced sentence. Huge debate about second chances, redemption. He gets out, goes to a halfway house, and then dies. Just like that.
It's a story. Crime, power, betrayal. Even a bit of mystery, but even more. It asks some really tough questions about justice, accountability, and just how messed up human nature can be.
Here's something to think about. Did Rayful Edmond really pay for what he did, or did that redeem him in any way? It's a question without an easy answer. It makes you think about the gray areas, the ones we all face in real life. We really encourage you, keep exploring this story. It's fascinating and complex. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
His arrest, the trial, it was a spectacle. But the crazy part is how he managed to keep his drug operation running, even from prison. I mean, the audacity of this guy. And it really says something about the system and how it failed.
Yeah. Let's unpack that a bit. You were saying before he used prison phones to connect with suppliers in Colombia, but how did he actually move drugs and money? I mean, while he was locked up in a maximum security prison.
He had this whole network, loyal associates on the outside. They handled the day-to-day stuff, got their instructions from Edmund through coded messages during calls, visits. It was sophisticated. They exploited weaknesses in security.
Yeah, this is like, what do you mean? Did he have corrupt guards helping him or prison staff?
Oh, there were definitely allegations of corruption. But the investigations never really proved any direct involvement. The problem was more like not enough monitoring of inmate communications, their activities. I mean, think about it. This was before, email, social media.
Yeah.
Everything was phone calls. Way easier to manipulate.
So he was basically taking advantage of how things worked back then.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the prisons. Law enforcement, they were still trying to figure out the crack epidemic, the scale of it, how complex it was.
Yeah.
Edmund's operation, it was a perfect example of how these traffickers, they were adapting, innovating, staying ahead of the game.
And this was all happening when there was so much pressure, to get tough on crime, crack down on drugs. So the fact that Edmund was running things from prison, I bet that made people furious.
Oh, yeah. It was a huge scandal. Congressional hearings, they called for stricter security. The whole Bureau of Prisons, they had to revamp their policies, how they monitored inmates, what they were doing, who they were talking to.
So in a weird way, Edmund's criminal enterprise, it actually made prisons more secure.
Unintended consequences, for sure. Edmund, he forced the system to face its weaknesses, to adapt to this new era of criminal sophistication. And then, well, you know the story. He becomes a government informant.
That's the part that still just blows my mind. This guy built his whole empire on defiance, intimidation, and then he flips, works with the very people he was fighting against.
It's dramatic, isn't it? And it makes you wonder about his reasons. Was it like real remorse or just desperation or something else entirely?
You said the official story is he cooperated to help his mother get a reduced sentence. But was there any evidence that maybe he was actually trying to make things right?
Hard to say, for sure, what was going on in his head. He always said it was about his mother, protecting his family. But some people, they think he was also trying to to salvage his reputation, whatever was left of it anyway.
It's wild to think about the change he must have gone through, from powerful drug lord to an informant living in hiding. That's a huge shift, your whole identity, your whole life.
Like living multiple lives almost. Street hustler, kingpin, prisoner pulling the strings, then poof, informant disappears. Each part of his life, it shows you a different side of him and the choices he made.
Makes you wonder how he reconciled his past with cooperating with the government. Did he think it was a way to redeem himself, or was it just survival?
Those are questions maybe only Rayful Edmond could answer. But his story, it makes you think about how complicated people are and the possibility of change, even when things seem impossible.
It also shows you how morally ambiguous things can be in real life. It's rarely, heroes and villains. Clear cut. Edmund was a criminal. He did a lot of damage. But he also took risks to help take down other criminals. He doesn't fit neatly into any box.
Nope. And that's what makes his story so interesting. It makes you question, crime and punishment, redemption, and just how capable humans are of both good and bad.
And we can't forget, Edmund's actions, they had a much wider impact. His rise and fall, they were tied to the crack epidemic, and that had devastating consequences for communities all over the country.
The crack epidemic, it was complex. Social, economic factors.
Yeah.
Poverty, inequality, racism. Edmund's operation, it was just one piece of it. But his story, it gives you a glimpse into the human cost of this tragic chapter in American history.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the drama, all the twists and turns, but we have to remember the real consequences, the lives affected by the drug trade.
A cautionary tale. Remind us we have to address the root causes of crime, addiction, real justice. It's more than just locking people up. It's about understanding the social, the economic factors, and creating opportunities for real change.
So from running things in prison to becoming an informant, Rayful Edmond III's story, it's just full of unbelievable turns. But what happened next? What happened after he went into witness protection?
Well, we know he came back, right, to a D.C. courtroom in 2018, asking for a reduced sentence. But the reaction, it wasn't exactly welcoming.
Let's get into that. The debate about his sentence, what he left behind, and the final chapter of his life. Edmond's back in D.C., decades after running things, now asking for less time. Must have been crazy for the city.
Huge news. Oh, yeah. Think about it. People who lived through the crack epidemic, people who lost loved ones, and then his old associates, wondering what he might say.
Were they worried that, those associates might come after him?
Absolutely. Even after witness protection, all those years, people still held grudges. The authorities, they had to really protect him during those hearings.
You said people were divided about reducing his sentence. What were the main arguments for and against letting him out?
People who supported it, they said he did a lot of time already and he helped the government take down other drug operations. They said he deserved a second chance. Maybe he could, actually help society.
Right. What about the people who wanted him to stay locked up?
They said his crimes were too serious. The damage he did, the crack epidemic, the impact it had, it was too much. Releasing him, they said, would send the wrong message and maybe put the community at risk.
It's tough. On one hand, you have rehabilitation, second chances, but then there's accountability, justice for the victims.
Yeah. It's a constant dilemma in the justice system.
Yeah.
How do you balance what the individual needs and what society needs? And how do you know if someone is really sorry, if they can actually change?
You said a survey showed half of D.C. residents wanted him released. That's a lot of people.
It shows you his legacy. It's complicated. He was a symbol of all the bad stuff that came with the drug trade. But some people, they thought he was trying to redeem himself. It's not, black and white.
And even though the judge did reduce his sentence, he still had those extra 30 years for running things from prison. So he didn't actually get out right away?
No, he went to a halfway house, sort of a transition between prison and freedom. It was controversial, but it reflected, the whole debate about how to handle cases like his.
So he's in a halfway house trying to rebuild his life, I guess. And then he dies. Heart attack. It almost feels anticlimactic after everything that happened.
It does make you think. Even the most notorious figures, they're still human. Same weaknesses as everyone else. And, a life like his, it must have taken a toll. Physically, emotionally.
It's like his death, it kind of brought an end to a story that just seemed to keep going.
And in the end, we're left with more questions than answers. Did he really regret what he did? Did he find any peace? We don't know. But we do know his story still fascinates us. It makes us think about justice, redemption, how complicated people are.
This deep dive, it's been wild. From drug lord to prison to informant, Raphael Edmund III's life, it was definitely not boring.
His story, it's like a snapshot of a really crazy time in America. The crack epidemic, how devastating it was. And it's a warning about power and greed, what they can do to you.
We've covered a lot. His rise, his tactics, John Thompson, the whole prison operation, becoming an informant, the debate about letting him out, and then his death. It's a story that still matters today.
Yeah, it makes you think about the justice system, what redemption really means, how to balance individual rights and what society needs. And it shows you the past, it never really goes away. Raphael Edmund III, his life, it still echoes in D.C. and beyond.
So what do you think? We want you to really explore this story. Look at it from all sides. Decide for yourself. Did Raphael Edmund pay for what he did? Did becoming an informant? Was that redemption? Maybe there's no easy answer. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and times of Raphael Edmund III. See you next time.
All right, so today we're doing a deep dive into the life of Raymond Washington.
Founder of the Crips.
Exactly, the founder of the Crips.
Yeah.
And our main source for this is his Wikipedia article.
Sounds good.
And you might be surprised by what we find when we really start digging into this, right? Like,
yeah.
When you think Crips, you probably picture gang violence.
Of course.
But what about the person behind that name, right? Like, who was Raymond Washington?
It's easy to forget that these infamous figures, right,
Yeah.
were once just kids shaped by their circumstance.
Shaped by their circumstances.
Right. So
Yeah.
let's rewind the clock back to 1953,
Okay.
South Central L.A.
Okay.
That's where Raymond Washington's story begins.
And it's a story full of contradictions, right? Like right from the start.
Yeah.
Some of his neighbors, they describe him as this protector figure,
Right.
someone who wanted to keep his community safe.
Mm-hmm.
But others,
Yeah.
they paint a very different picture.
Right.
They call him a bully.
Yeah, it's interesting.
How do you make sense of that?
I think that paradox, right, like the desire for order mixed with a tendency towards aggression,
Yeah.
it really sets the stage for his later life, you know?
Yeah.
It's also important to note that despite being a talented athlete,
Okay.
he was expelled from school multiple times.
Wow.
You have to wonder how those experiences, that frustration with traditional systems,
Right.
might have fueled his path.
It's like those seeds of rebellion were already planted.
Exactly.
And then you add on the backdrop of the late 1960s in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
right? You have rising youth crime. The old gangs are kind of fading away.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like it was the perfect recipe for something new to emerge.
Absolutely. And Raymond Washington was already involved with a gang called the Avenues.
Okay.
He was already kind of primed to step into that void.
Yeah.
But things really shifted when he met Stanley Tookie Williams in 1971.
Okay.
Now, this wasn't just some chance encounter. This was a strategic alliance that would reshape the entire gang landscape of L.A.
I was struck by this detail in the article where it mentions that even before they joined forces, they dressed alike, both groups.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, leather jackets, starched jeans, suspenders. It's almost like a preview of the Crips' later emphasis on visual identity.
Absolutely. It's more than just a fashion choice. It's about branding and power.
Yeah.
They understood the importance of a unified image,
Yeah.
a way to project strength and intimidate rivals.
Right?
And by joining forces with Tookie's gang,
Yeah.
they created a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
Of course, we can't forget McThomas,
Oh, right. Yeah.
the third key figure in this early formation.
So from this meeting, the Crips, as we know them, were born.
Yeah.
And their rise was, what, meteoric?
It was fast, yeah.
They controlled criminal activities.
Mm-hmm.
Their name was everywhere.
Yeah.
The media was amplifying their image, which in turn, I'm sure,
Oh, definitely.
attracted more recruits.
Yeah, the media played a significant role, often sensationalizing their activities and inadvertently giving them the notoriety that I think they craved.
Right, yeah.
But just as the Crips were reaching the peak of their power, their founder faced a major setback.
Okay.
In 1974, Raymond Washington was convicted of robbery and sent to prison.
And this isn't just any prison sentence.
Oh, no.
This seems like a major turning point in the story.
Definitely.
He's the first Crip to be incarcerated at dual vocational institution.
Right.
And he tries to establish the gang's presence there,
Mm-hmm.
which leads to clashes with the established prison groups.
Right. Imagine the tension. He's
Yeah.
trying to exert control in a whole new environment while simultaneously becoming a target for inmates
Right.
whose loved ones had been victims of Crip violence outside.
He becomes a symbol
He
of the
does.
gang's actions,
Exactly.
even while behind bars.
That's right.
It's like he's living this double life.
Yeah.
The Crips are gaining power on the streets,
Mhm.
but he's facing increasing danger behind bars.
Right.
This imprisonment, it seems to me, is where things start to unravel.
Well, Washington's time in prison created a leadership vacuum
Yeah.
that would have significant consequences for the Crips.
Okay.
Let's unpack that part of the story after a quick.
Wait, before we move on, I want to circle back to something you said earlier.
Sure.
You called this meeting between Washington and Williams a strategic alliance.
I did, yeah.
What exactly did that entail?
Okay, so from what we can gather,
Yeah.
it wasn't a hostile takeover. It was more about recognizing their shared goals
Okay.
and the benefits of collaboration,
Yeah.
They essentially combined their resources, manpower, and territory.
So it was about more than just numbers. It
Exactly.
was about consolidating power
Yeah,
and resources.
that's right. Which ultimately allowed them to dominate other gangs and exert control over criminal enterprises.
Wow.
It was a shrewd move
It was.
that paved the way for the Crips' dominance, albeit with unintended consequences, of course.
And it's fascinating to think about how this alliance, forged in the streets of South Central LA,
Right.
would go on to have such a profound impact
Yeah.
on the city's history.
And not just the city's history, but on the lives of countless individuals, both within the gang and those caught in its crossfire.
Absolutely.
But before we delve into that,
Yeah.
let's talk about what happened when Washington was released from prison in 1976.
Okay.
What he encountered upon his return was a far cry from the gang he had left behind.
Right, because during his time away, the Crips had transformed.
Absolutely. But let's explore those changes in more detail after a quick...
Hold on, I'm curious about something.
Okay.
We've been talking about the Crips' rise to power,
Yeah.
but what about the law enforcement response?
That's another crucial aspect of this story.
Yeah.
While law enforcement was certainly aware of the Crips' activities,
Yeah.
their initial response was hampered by several factors.
Okay.
The Crips were decentralized,
Yeah.
making it difficult to pinpoint leadership and disrupt their operations. Right.
Additionally, the gang's stronghold was in marginalized communities where distrust of law enforcement was already deeply entrenched.
Okay.
This created a complex dynamic that allowed the Crips to thrive despite police efforts.
So a combination of the Crips' organizational structure and the strained relationship between law enforcement and the community contributed to the gang's unchecked growth. It's a reminder that we can't simply look at these events in isolation.
Right.
There's always a broader context, a complex interplay of social and political forces at play.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that context is crucial to understanding the events that unfolded when Washington was released from prison.
Right.
Remember, the Crips he left behind were very different from the ones he encountered upon his return.
Right. He was gone for 2 years.
Right.
And in that time, the Crips he had founded had evolved in ways he never could have imagined.
That's right.
The violence had escalated, internal conflicts had erupted, and the gang was fracturing into rival factions.
It was a far cry from the organization he'd envisioned.
And this transformation, this descent into chaos and bloodshed, is where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're picking up the story in 1976.
Okay.
Raymond Washington's getting released from prison.
Yeah.
He's returning to a world that has, moved on without him.
Right.
What did he find when he stepped back onto the streets of South Central?
He found a gang that was almost unrecognizable.
Wow.
The Crips he left behind, they were focused on maintaining order, protecting their territory. But in his absence, the focus had shifted to violence and power struggles. Guns had become commonplace. And the Crips were no longer this unified force. They had splintered into these various sets, often battling each other for control.
A monster he created had grown out of control.
Right.
And now he was facing the consequences.
Yeah.
What was his reaction to all of this?
From what we can tell, he was shocked
Yeah.
and disillusioned by what he saw.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
He went to prison for robbery,
Right.
not for murder
Yeah.
or any of the increasingly violent crimes
Exactly.
that the Crips were now committing.
Yeah. He had envisioned a different path for the gang.
Yeah.
And now that vision was shattered.
It's a fascinating psychological dilemma, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You create something with a certain intention,
Right.
but then it takes on a life of its own.
It does.
evolving in ways you never anticipated.
Right.
And now you're left grappling with the responsibility for the unintended consequences.
Exactly. And in Washington's case, those consequences were devastating.
Yeah.
The Crips' escalating violence was tearing apart the very community he had initially sought to protect.
It seems like he tried to regain control.
There is some evidence to suggest that, yeah.
To bring the various sets back under one umbrella,
Mm-hmm.
there was even talk of a truce with the Bloods.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
A truce with the Bloods. That's a pretty radical shift from where things were just a few years earlier.
It is.
What prompted that change of heart?
It seems that Washington's time in prison,
Okay.
witnessing firsthand the brutality and pointlessness of gang warfare,
Yeah.
had a profound impact on his thinking.
Okay.
You know, he saw how the cycle of violence only led to more pain and suffering,
Yeah.
and he desperately wanted to find a way out.
So we have this complex figure
Yeah.
trying to navigate a situation that's spiraling out of control.
Right.
He's grappling with his own past, the unintended consequences of his actions,
Right.
and the very real threat of violence that's surrounding him.
Yeah.
How did he handle all of this pressure?
It's difficult to say for sure.
Yeah.
But by all accounts, Washington was struggling to
Right.
reconcile his desire for peace
Mhm.
with the realities of the gang life that he had helped to create.
Right.
Some argue that he never truly wanted to leave that life behind, pointing to evidence suggesting that he was still involved in criminal activities after his release.
Yeah.
Others maintain that he was genuinely seeking redemption,
Okay.
but was trapped in a system that offered no easy escape.
It's that ambiguity, right?
Yeah.
That clash between intention and outcome.
Right.
That, I think, makes his story so compelling.
It really does.
But sadly, Raymond Washington's efforts to, change the course of the Crips,
Yeah.
they were cut short.
Tragically, his story ends just 3 years after his release from prison
Wow.
in 1979, just 5 days before his 26th birthday.
Jeez.
Raymond Washington was gunned down in a drive-by shooting.
Shot dead in the streets he once ruled.
Yeah,
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it?
it really is.
This rise to power,
Mm-hmm.
the fall from grace,
Yeah.
the violent end.
It's a classic tragedy.
Tell me more about the circumstances of his death.
Well, the details surrounding his murder are still shrouded in mystery.
Okay.
He was reportedly talking to someone in a car,
Yeah.
someone he likely knew. Okay.
When he was shot, and the case remains unsolved to this day,
Wow.
leaving us with more questions than answers.
Was it a rival gang?
Possibly?
An internal power struggle?
Could be.
Or something else entirely?
We may never know for sure,
Yeah.
but what we do know is that Raymond Washington's death marked a turning point in the history of the Crips.
How so?
Well, his death left a void in leadership,
Okay.
which further fueled the internal conflicts and violence that were already tearing the gang apart.
Okay.
The fragile peace he had been trying to broker, it shattered.
Yeah.
And the Crips descended even deeper into this cycle of retaliation and bloodshed that continues to plague Los Angeles to this day.
It's a stark reminder that even when individuals trying to step back from the violence they've helped create,
Yeah.
the consequences of their actions can continue to ripple outwards, shaping the lives of generations to come.
Absolutely. And it raises a crucial question.
Yeah.
Could things have been different if Washington had lived?
Yeah. Could he have steered the Crips away from the path of escalating violence?
Right.
Or was the gang's trajectory already set in motion beyond anyone's control?
It's impossible to know for sure,
It is.
but it's a question worth pondering.
I think so.
What do you think?
There's no easy answer.
Right.
On one hand, he had the charisma, the street cred, and
Yeah.
the vision to potentially unite the Crips and guide them towards a different path.
Okay.
But on the other hand, the forces driving the gang violence, things like poverty,
Yeah.
lack of opportunity, systemic racism,
Right.
were deeply entrenched.
Yeah.
And it's unclear if even someone with Washington's influence could have overcome those challenges.
So it's a complex mix of individual agency and societal forces.
Exactly.
Raymond Washington made choices that had devastating consequences.
He did.
But he was also operating within a system that stacked the deck against him and countless others like him.
That's right. And I think that's the key takeaway from Washington's story. It's
Yeah.
not just about one man or one gang.
Right?
It's about understanding the intricate interplay of personal choices and societal factors that contribute to the rise and persistence of gang violence.
It's a reminder that we can't simply label individuals as good or bad
No.
and wash our hands of the problem.
Right.
We have to grapple with the complexities,
We do.
nuances, the systemic issues that create the conditions for violence to flourish.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the heart of what makes this deep dive so important.
Okay.
It's not just about revisiting the past.
Yeah.
It's about using that past to inform our understanding of the present
Right.
and to guide our actions towards a better future.
It's about looking beyond the headlines and the stereotypes
Yes.
and engaging with the human stories that lie beneath.
Exactly. And with that in mind, I think it's time to shift our focus to the broader context of Raymond Washington's story.
Okay.
Let's talk about the societal factors that contributed to the rise of the Crips
Okay.
and continue to fuel gang violence today.
So we've been talking about Raymond Washington's life and his role in the rise of the Crips and his, tragic death.
Right.
But now I kind of want to zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
Look at the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
What was it about South Central Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s that made it such fertile ground for gang violence?
Well, you have to remember, this was a time of, immense social upheaval.
Right.
The civil rights movement was in full swing.
Right.
The Vietnam War was raging.
Yeah.
And cities across America were grappling with racial tensions and economic inequality.
Yeah. And South Central Los Angeles was hit particularly hard, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we're talking about a community facing multiple layers of adversity.
Right.
Poverty, segregation, lack of opportunity.
Yeah.
How did these factors specifically contribute to the rise of gangs like the Crips?
Well, for many young people in these marginalized communities, gangs offered a sense of belonging, identity, and purpose that they just weren't finding elsewhere. They provided protection from the violence and chaos that surrounded them, and they offered a path to power and respect in a world that often denied them both.
It's almost like a twisted reflection of the American dream, right?
It is, yeah.
The pursuit of success and status, but within a system that's rigged against you.
That's a powerful way to put it, and it's important to note that this wasn't just about individual failings or a lack of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
The systems in place, education, law enforcement, social services,
Yeah.
they were often failing these communities,
Right.
perpetuating cycles of poverty and despair.
So gangs became a way to fill the void, to
Exactly.
create a sense of order and community in the absence of, effective support systems.
Right, but as we've seen, that solution came with a very heavy price.
Yeah.
A cycle of violence that only deepened the existing problems.
And that cycle, it continues to play out in communities across America today.
It does. Gangs are still a symptom of deeper societal issues, inequality, poverty,
Yeah.
lack of opportunity. We can't simply arrest our way out of this problem.
Right.
We need to address the root causes, the systemic failures that create fertile ground for gangs to flourish.
So what can we do? Like, if Raymond Washington's story is a microcosm of this larger issue,
Yeah.
what lessons can we learn from it?
Well, I think his story offers some important insights.
Oh.
First, we need to invest in these communities,
Okay.
providing access to quality education, job training, and social services.
Yeah.
We need to create pathways to opportunity to give young people a sense of hope and a belief that they can succeed without resorting to violence.
So it's about empowerment.
Exactly.
About giving people the tools they need to build a better future for themselves and their communities.
Absolutely. And it's also about addressing the systemic issues that perpetuate inequality.
Right.
And create fertile ground for gang violence.
Yeah.
We need to dismantle racist policies and practices, invest in affordable housing and healthcare,
Yeah.
and create a more just and equitable society.
It's a tall order.
It is.
But it's clear that we can't afford to ignore these challenges.
We can't.
The cost of inaction is just too high.
It is. And I think that's the most important takeaway from our deep dive into the life of Raymond Washington.
Right.
His story is a reminder that gang violence is not just a problem of individuals or communities. It's a reflection of our collective failures as a society.
Right.
And it's a call to action.
Yeah.
A challenge to confront these failures and work towards creating a world where every young person has the opportunity to thrive.
Right.
Free from the allure and the threat of violence.
It's a sobering message, but also, I think, hopeful.
I agree.
Because it reminds us that we have the power to change the course of history.
We do.
We can learn from the past, confront the present, and build a better future.
And that's what makes these deep dives so valuable.
Yeah.
They challenge us to think critically,
Right.
to ask tough questions, and to engage with the complexities of the world around us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Raymond Washington's story may be over,
Yeah.
but the conversation it sparks should continue.
Absolutely.
Keep learning,
Right.
keep questioning,
Yeah.
and keep pushing for change.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.